Welcome to the second of our video series on voting theory. In the previous video, we introduced the problem of social choice, the problem that voting theory is trying to solve. Recall that was the problem of trying to take a set of individuals' preferences and attitudes towards a set of candidates or alternatives and amalgamate those individual attitudes into a single choice set or selection of winners from among all the alternatives or candidates. In this video, we're going to go over the probably the most commonly used social choice procedure for solving social choice problems, and that's plurality vote. And we'll also distinguish in this video between the notion of a plurality and the notion of a majority. And then in subsequent videos, we'll discuss other sorts of voting rules beyond plurality vote. Okay, so this video will be on plurality versus majority. Okay, so first let's consider an example of a voting problem. Let's suppose that, remember, voting problems have three ingredients. They have a set of alternatives, A, and let's suppose this is a political election in which we have three candidates. So let's say we have a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent running. And then we have a set of voters, right? The set of people who are going to be participating in the election. And just to keep the numbers small and manageable, let's suppose we just have 21 voters in this election. So we have voter 1, we have voter 2, voter 3, and so on through voter 21. Okay. And then we have attitudes that each of those voters exhibit. And normally, as we said in the last video, we're going to view the attitudes of voters as rankings of all of the alternatives. So in this case, the attitude of, for example, voter 1 might be that the Republican is best, and then the independent, and then maybe the Democrat is worse. So maybe this is a very conservative voter 1. When we're applying plurality and majority vote, though, we don't necessarily need this much information. We don't need the full ranking of all the candidates from each individual voter. It'll suffice if we just know every voter's top choice, top candidate. So that's the only information I'm going to write down for this example. So let's suppose in this example, the Republican, the Democrat, and the independent are each favored by the following number of people. Let's suppose that let's say the Republican has 10 supporters of the 21, the Democrat has 8, and the independent has 3 supporters. Okay. So this illustrates a scenario in which we would say the Republican is a plurality vote winner, but not a majority vote winner. Right? Why is the Republican here a plurality vote winner and not a majority vote winner? Well, to explain that, we have to explain the notion of a plurality winner and the notion of a majority winner. So first, let's start with defining what a plurality winner is. So, definition. Suppose that we partition our set V of voters according to each voter's top alternative. Giving us V1, V2, ... through Vm. And the idea here is that we're taking our full set of voters V, and we're separating out that full set of voters V according to who favors each of the different alternatives. So there'll be some subset of V, some group of voters whose favorite alternative is the Republican. Maybe that's V1. And there'll be some set of voters whose favorite alternative is the Democrat. and that's V2, and so on. So we're separating out or partitioning the set of voters V into the group that favors alternative 1 the most, the group that favors alternative 2 the most, and so on. Now we're going to say that VI, a set VI of voters, subset of voters, let's see, VI is a plurality of the vote. Plurality of the vote if the following holds. If the size of the set of VI is greater than or equal to the size of the set Vj for all j in our set from 1 through n of voters. Okay. The top candidate according to the voters in VI is called the plurality candidate. So what does this mean, right? The plurality candidate is to be the candidate who, when you take all of the voters that most favor that candidate, you get a set of voters whose size, the number of voters that are of that persuasion, is at least as big, at least as great, as the size of the set of voters that favor any other individual alternative. So if we look back to this example we had, with the 10 people favoring the Republican, 8 people favoring the Democrat, and 3 favoring the Independent, the Republican would count as the plurality vote winner there because the size of the set of voters that favor them is 10, which is bigger than either 8, which is the size of the set of voters that favor the Democrat, or 3, which is the size of the set of voters that favor the Independent. So in this example, the Republican would be the plurality candidate. Okay, now we want to distinguish the notion of a plurality of the vote and a plurality candidate from the notion of a majority of the vote, or a majority candidate. Right? So this will be a new definition. Okay, definition. We say that VI is a majority of the vote if the size of VI is greater than half of the overall size of voters, or equivalently, the size of VI is greater than the size of the union of all the other VJs, where J is not equal to I. Right? So this is to say a majority of the vote is just greater than 50% of the voters. So it makes up over half the size of all the voters. That gives you a majority of the vote. And the top candidate according to the voters in a majority is unsurprisingly called the majority candidate. So note here that in our example of the Republican versus Democrat versus Independent, while the Republican was the plurality candidate, because 10 is bigger than 8, it's also bigger than 3, the Republican is not the majority candidate, because the overall size of the set of voters is 21, and 10 is not greater than half of 21. Half of 21 would be 10 and a half. 10 is not greater than 10 and a half. So in this case, the Republican is not the majority winner, even though they would be the plurality vote winner. If we changed the scenario, though, so that we had, let's say again, the Republican versus the Democrat versus the Independent, and let's say now instead 11 voters favored the Republican, 8 favored the Democrat, and only 2 favored the Independent. In this case, the Republican would qualify as both the plurality and the majority vote winner. Because now they have if we partition again the set of voters according to who their top candidate is, the size of the set of voters that favor the Republican most will be greater than each of the other two, and it'll also be greater than the union of the other two, or equivalently greater than half the overall size of the set of voters. Okay, now that we've defined the notion of a majority and a plurality, we can now define the notion, or we can define a social choice procedure that's based on this notion. So we can define a way of solving the problem of social choice, initial proposal. We can talk about the plurality procedure. Plurality vote procedure. So we're going to say that the plurality vote procedure works the following way. We declare a member of our set of alternatives, little a and big A, a particular alternative, little a, is going to be a potential winner, or potential winner, which is to say a member of our choice set, A star, just in case A is a plurality winner. Just in case A has the plurality of the vote behind it. Note this is a potential solution to the problem of social choice. Anytime we have a voting problem, we have a set of alternatives, we have a set of voters. Those voters take attitudes to the alternatives given by a ranking of the alternatives for each voter. One way of trying to amalgamate all of that into a single choice set is just to look at whoever the plurality candidates are, the plurality winners, and declare them to be in the choice set, declare them to be the potential winners of the election. And that will give us a particular way of solving the problem of social choice, a particular social choice procedure. Plurality vote is a super commonly used procedure. It's used in a lot of different elections in the US and in countries around the world. It's probably also the one that you think of most naturally, like if we were trying to decide what food we were going to bring to the final end of the semester party for the class, and I'd give 3 options. I say we could bring apples, bananas, or cherries. Probably, and I say, how should we vote on this? Probably the first idea that would come to people's minds would be to do a plurality vote procedure, to ask everybody what their top choice is. We'd look at how many people have apples as their top choice, how many people have bananas as their top choice, how many people have cherries as their top choice, and we would look at which group is bigger, which has the plurality of the vote. Note, right, well, we cannot, this is an important difference between plurality vote and, or the notion of plurality and the notion of majority. We cannot define a similar procedure, voting procedure, using majority in place of plurality. At least we can't do that if we want our social choice procedures to always return an answer, always return a non-empty choice set. And that's because in some voting problems, there is no candidate that commands a majority. So if we think back, for example, to that example we had with the Republican versus the Democrat versus the Independent, in the original scenario, we had 10 voters for the Republican, 8 for the Democrat, 3 for the Independent. In this case, none of the candidates had a majority. So if we tried to use a social choice procedure where we said, okay, the winners, the members of the winning choice set are going to be those with the majority of the vote, there would be nobody here who would qualify as a winner. Nobody would be in the majority. But there is always going to be a plurality vote winner, right? There'll always be some candidate, in this case again, it happened to be the Republican, who had a plurality of the vote. No, so plurality winners are always guaranteed to exist in an election. Majority winners are not always guaranteed to exist in an election. Of course, when there is a majority vote winner, that majority vote winner will also be the plurality vote winner as well. We should note, too, that it is also possible, another note, it is possible to have multiple plurality vote winners. Multiple plurality winners. So, for example, we could tweak this Republican, Democrat, Independent case, and we could suppose there's 10 voters behind the Republican, 10 behind the Democrat, and only 1 behind the Independent. Right? In this case, both the Republican and the Democrat qualify as plurality vote winners, because they both have 10 voters behind them, neither of which is a majority, so they're neither of them are majority winners. But they're both equal to one another in terms of the size of voters they have behind them, and they're both greater than the number of voters anybody else has behind them, in this case, the Independent. Right. Okay, great. So this will conclude our survey of plurality vote and how plurality winners differ from majority winners. Plurality vote procedure, as we've said, very common, very easy to use voting procedure, but there are objections that various people have to using plurality vote, and so people have proposed lots of alternative ways of solving the problem of social choice beyond the plurality vote method. In some subsequent videos, we'll talk about some of those potential problems with plurality vote, and we'll look at some of the alternative voting methods. In particular, I think in the next video, we'll look at some what are known as elimination procedures, which are alternative social choice procedures to the plurality vote procedure. So look out for that next video, and thanks for watching this second video in the course on voting theory.